This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
My name is Selena Teixeira. Welcome back to For the Record. Truth and Reconciliation Day is approaching next week, and as Canada continues to prepare, events are going on in the Lower Mainland, prompting newcomers to Canada to learn more about Indigenous considerations. Indigenous matters are especially important to us as journalists, making efforts to amplify Indigenous voices in the media, newsroom, and everyday life. Events like Towards Reconciliation, Start Your Learning Journey encourages newcomers to educate themselves on Indigenous art, land acknowledgements, and the newly implemented UNDRIP. Vancouver Public Library is home to many programs and events like the aforementioned Towards Reconciliation. Amara Charters is part of the library's Programming and Learning Department, as she hosts many events, including this one. Charters explains the importance of Indigenous learning upon newcomers and Canadians alike.
My name is Amara. I work in the Programming and Learning Department of the Vancouver Public Library. Part of my job is doing events and classes for adults with Towards Reconciliation, Start Your Learning Journey being one of the classes that we offer. It is one of 3 Indigenous considerations classes that the staff have written and present for members of the public.
Okay, and why do you think it's important to educate Canadians about truth and reconciliation, especially newcomers to Canada?
Yeah, newcomers were actually at the very forefront of our mind when we started these classes. One of the regular programs that we run is a ESL conversation circle every week. We take some time at the end of the program to answer any other questions folks have. We noticed over time that we were getting a lot of questions from newcomers to Canada about Indigenous matters. Things like, I saw some art at the airport, what does it mean? Or what is the difference between Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, and just folks wanting to know about some newcomer-friendly resources where they can learn. It's part of the citizenship information that you learn, but it's really only a surface level resources that you get. So with specifically newcomers in mind, we created our first Truth and Reconciliation based program, and it's been great. We've been running these programs since, I think, 2022. We think it is really important for the library to be a resource for folks around truth and reconciliation, Indigenous considerations, because people are coming to us, and we need to be prepared to answer their questions and provide them information in an accessible format. These classes are not the only thing that we do at the library. We have an Indigenous collection. We host many other programs with Indigenous presenters, and we have worked more of our library spaces to include art. We have a branch that has been gifted a name from the Musqueam Nation. So the library as a public institution needs to be at the forefront of educating our community. And we've been doing that for several years in many different ways.
Okay, and do you think that the library is the best place to learn about Indigenous considerations in Vancouver?
I think the best place will always be directly from the nations, from Indigenous presenters. However, the library, as one of its main goals, is as a information resource center. We are dedicated to our communities to provide educational and fun programming, as well as access to books, films, music, we are also a free resource. We don't, nothing at the library costs money other than printing, but that's here or there. So we are a good, accessible resource for the community, and we do our very best to bring in Indigenous presenters when we can for a variety of types of programs. So while I think that the best resource is going to always be directly from Indigenous folks, we are a sort of next best thing for our communities.
Okay. And as Canadians, what do you think we can do to better amplify Indigenous voices, especially in the media like the news?
For sure. With, specifically media, I would say that if you are in a role where you can bring in Indigenous voices, to always do that, to always have an Indigenous voice providing context, history, opinion on Indigenous matters. I would say that, individuals should be prioritizing the type of media that they consume. In these classes that I do, I provide book lists, a film list, things like that. And I encourage folks to, for every book, film, CD that you listen to by a non-Indigenous creator, follow it up with an Indigenous voice. I think as individuals, we do have a lot of power in what we consume and what we support. We live in a city that is absolutely full of opportunities. We have so many museums. We have so many different types of events and classes. There's so much to access here in this city, and we need to be taking advantage of that. Going to publicly accessible events, purchasing from Indigenous businesses, going to things like the Bill Reid Gallery, seeing the Cessnam exhibit at the Museum of Vancouver. There is so much that we can do to both educate ourselves and to celebrate Indigenous creativity.
Yeah. And I was checking on your guys' website, and you were talking about recent changes like UNDRIP. Can you expand on that? Because I have not heard about that before.
About UNDRIP?
Yeah.
Yeah, so UNDRIP, it stands for the United Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People. This was a declaration from the UN that came about in 2007. The United Nations put this together. Their member nations took a vote, and the vast majority of member nations voted to have this resolution as part of their laws. There were 4 countries who voted against it initially: Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. Eventually, in 2021, Canada did reverse its position and brought UNDRIP into law. UNDRIP does or says a few things. A lot of it has to do with, of course, the rights of Indigenous folks. It has a few core themes. So one of the things is that it establishes a minimum standard for survival, dignity, and well-being of the Indigenous peoples of the world. What this sort of means when a country takes UNDRIP on is that they are saying, going forward, any federal level laws that they put into place need to comply with UNDRIP, meaning that they, in whatever capacity these laws do, will advance Indigenous rights in whatever capacity these sorts of things come in. So one of the things that has been happening recently is with Bill C-5, which is around the federal government being able to fast track construction and infrastructure projects. And what is unclear with this one, or this specific bill, is that it implies that any projects that go through like Indigenous land can be fast-tracked without Indigenous consultation. So something like that goes against UNDRIP because it is not putting Indigenous considerations at the forefront. So there is also the City of Vancouver has adopted UNDRIP at a municipal level. In 2022, there was an UNDRIP task force composed of representatives from Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and the City of Vancouver, and they created an UNDRIP strategy for the city with their own calls to action that provide a framework for municipal reconciliation under a few different themes that hopes to create clear strategic priorities and actionable outcomes for the city.
Okay, great. That was all the questions I have for you. I have to keep the interview 10 minutes. Sorry about that.
Sure.
But
No problem.
thank you so much for your time. And I was really interested in learning about the journey towards reconciliation.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for getting in touch with us. I hope this helps.
Welcome back to For the Record. My name is Selena Teixeira, and you're listening to BCIT's The Crow.